He said it like weather. "Dad, don't come to my wedding. She says you make her feel unsafe." In one breath, a lifetime of late nights, hospital halls, and hard-won love was pushed outside the door. I didn't argue. I picked up what he couldn't see, the cracks behind a perfect smile, and walked the only road left. Bring the truth, not the noise. What came next didn't just pause a ceremony. It saved a life from being built on a lie. Before diving into today's story, let us know in the comments, where are you joining us from today? We love knowing how our stories connect with people across the world. And remember, subscribing and turning on notifications means you'll always be part of our next adventure. Now, take a deep breath, clear your thoughts, and get ready for a story that promises emotion, surprise, and inspiration from beginning to end. The wind off the Atlantic arrives before the sun, salted and thin, sliding through the cedar shingles of my small house like a memory that refuses to seal. I wake at 5:45 without an alarm and set the kettle while gulls quarrel over the bait trucks down at the harbor. The cottage smells of linseed oil and coffee grounds, a chapel of small routines. On the mantel, Diane's photo catches the first gray light. Her smile looks braver than the sickness that took it from me. Out back, the shop waits, cool and orderly. Chisels hang by their shadows. Plain irons shine like new ice. I keep rags in a coffee can because fire comes quickest to the careless. The oak on the bench is tight-grained, winter-felled, the kind that tells the truth if you listen. In the corner stands the dining table I built when Evan turned 12. It still carries a traveling scratch from the night he and his mother argued about homework and laughter won. I've sanded around that mark for years without erasing it. A ledger line deserves to be read. Maine in late autumn is a spare place, honest as cold water. I follow the harbor road past the bait shop where men I've known 40 years rinse their hands in steam and salt. We trade nods more than words. A fisherman lifts his cup and says, "Flat calm, Lloyd." I answer, "For now," and keep walking. That is how men my age say we're glad to see each other. Report the weather, leave the ache alone. Down on the floats, Diesel coughs once, then again until the harbor settles into prayer. The church sits on a white knuckle of hill above town. I made the pews there twice, once when I was 28 and foolish, and again after Diane died, when I needed work a man can finish with his hands. I still fit and refit the end caps when the seasons swell them. Wood moves, faith too. In the shop, I plane the board until curls fall like pale ribbon and the grain rises to meet me. The sound is steady as breathing. It is how I pray now, with shavings at my boots like quiet amens. Evan lives in Seattle, where the light seems different even through a phone. He's a software engineer, a job he tries to explain, and I pretend to understand. Our calls are shorter these days. We've learned the trick of leaving the hardest things unsaid, the way lobstermen leave a trap they know is empty because hauling it would only prove the fact. When the screen goes dark, the room grows larger than it needs to be. I put the phone on the counter and let the kettle boil again for the noise. He brought a woman home once, last spring, when the lilacs were honest. Marissa wore a camel coat and knew which fork belonged to which plate without checking. Her smile arrived a breath before her eyes did, like a porch light flipping on while someone decides whether to invite you in. She kept her phone face down beside the salt. I told myself it meant nothing. Loneliness biases the instrument. We ate chowder. Evan carried bowls to the sink the way he did when he was 10. When they left, the house kept the shape of their absence for a while, the way a bed holds heat after dawn. The town carries its news on porches and through the diner door. I heard about the engagement before I heard it from my son, not in malice, just the way tide finds every hollow. At the counter, a man asked, "When's the big day, Lloyd?" The waitress topped my cup and said, "Make him wear that suit." I offered the carpenter's shrug that covers what words cannot. I have a suit, navy wool, hanging in plastic at the back of the closet like a promise held in escrow. Sometimes I take it out and let it breathe while I oil the planes, and I picture walking down an aisle not as a spectacle but as a benediction. Evenings are for order. I wipe the bench until it smells like clean metal and oak, stack offcuts by size, and note the tide for no practical reason. The clock over the stove ticks with the patience of old houses. Somewhere a loose latch in the workshop chatters when the wind shifts north. A small sound a carpenter hears the way a surgeon hears a cough. Not urgent, not nothing. I make a note to shim it tomorrow and put the pencil back where it belongs. Tools behave when they have a place and people try. Before bed, I sit at the dining table and run my finger along the long scratch Evan made. It is softened with years like a scar that learned my skin. I picture him in a tuxedo, taller than me now, grinning with a boy's shameless pride. I picture myself at the end of a long aisle, hands quiet, heart loud. A man doesn't admit how much he wants that moment. He oils a tool and lets the wanting pass through the grain, trusting strength to come from patience. Believing joy is a craft you practice. I set Diane's teacup on the saucer she favored and leave it on the shelf. Habit, not haunting. In the closet, I move the suit to the outside knob so the wool can loosen the way lungs do after a long ride. On the harbor, the boats cough to life and settle. The wind lifts, then lays down like a dog deciding on sleep. The house lists and rights itself with the tide. The latch in the shop ticks again, faint as a hairline crack. The cottage stands plumb, the foundation is true. But somewhere, small and specific, a seam is opening. I tell myself it's only the wood adjusting to the weather. Still, I know wood. It never moves for no reason. At 8:17 p.m., the kitchen held a single yellow circle of light over the sink, a patient moon cast by the old enamel shade. Linseed and warm oak lingered on my hands from the board I'd oiled before supper. The wall clock ticked with a mortician's calm. Somewhere beyond the glass, a foghorn let out a blunt syllable and a gull answered, as if the harbor refused to agree with anything for long. My phone lay face down on the counter, a black stone on pale laminate, quiet as a kept secret. When it buzzed, it nudged the cutting board, and for a heartbeat I thought it might saw itself into the grain. Evan's voice was thinner than usual, stretched by distance and something practiced. "Dad, don't come to the wedding. Marissa says you make her feel unsafe." The room seemed to contract around the sentence the way wood cinches in dry heat. I had 100 cross-grained questions, but I set the oil rag flat on the cool stove so it wouldn't smolder. I answered the way you touch a splinter you're not ready to pull. "I understand." The call ended in a silence so complete the clock sounded like a metronome set too near the ear. I sat in the ladder-back chair I built 30 years ago and felt how small a chair can become when a man is trying not to stand. The air lost its temperature. The radiator popped once like a knuckle. I spread my fingers on the table, found the long, shallow scar Evan made in 7th grade, and traced it as if it might be Braille for courage. "Unsafe," I repeated without saying it out loud. The word felt prefabricated, clean-edged, the kind that slots neatly into other people's mouths. I breathed through my nose to steady the small tremor in my right hand, a souvenir from a day of planing oak. Memory arranged itself without asking. Marissa at my table last spring in her camel coat, her smile stepping into the room ahead of her eyes, her phone turned face down like a closed book. Small talk about healthy boundaries and protecting our peace, offered in the tone people use for nutritional advice. I had logged the details then and filed them under "Do Not Overread." Loneliness biases the instrument. Diane taught me that much. Tonight, the file floated up on its own, unshy, as if the house had tugged the drawer open. The town's telegraph proved faster than grief. A neighbor texted within the hour, "Which suit, Lloyd?" as if choosing cloth could fix a collapsed beam. The words were friendly enough to sting. I typed and erased more than once, then settled on "under the weather" and put the phone down like a hot tool. Buying time felt like lying, and lying sat poorly in the stomach. Tomorrow the diner would want details and deliver comfort sugar dusted with curiosity. I could already see the napkins, the poured coffee, the faces that call you by your first name when they don't know what else to do. I stood, opened the closet, and took the navy suit off the doorknob. The wool had loosened nicely, the shoulders were still true. I slid it back into the deep of the closet where a man keeps winter in memory. It felt like retreat because it was. Back at the table, the scar waited, patient. Once it had been a mark of clumsy adolescence and happy argument. Now it threw the new word into relief: unsafe. I have built with hazardous tools my whole life and never felt less dangerous than in this small kitchen. Hands washed, plain irons wrapped, lights low. Out in the workshop, a loose window latch ticked once in the wind. I wrote a note to shim it tomorrow and knew I was annotating more than hardware. Diane's counsel came in her voice as it always did, brisk and warm. Verify with kindness. Don't confuse pride with truth. I set rules to keep myself from the worst of my own impulses. No angry calls, no public posts, no triangulating relatives. Speak only when what I carry can't be twisted by someone else's mouth. If I was going to be written into a part I didn't audition for, I would at least stay off the chorus. Words like boundary had not belonged to men my age when we were boys. We learned endurance, the language of bent nails and redriven screws. But boundary has two uses: a shield that keeps harm out and a scalpel that cuts people from their places. If the word was being used on me as blade work, the answer would not be louder words. The answer would be weight. Facts with grain you can read. I could learn a new vocabulary without surrendering to shame. So I made a small, stubborn adjustment. I turned the phone face up and slid it to the center of the table. Screen dark, do not disturb, toggled on, an invitation to facts, not whispers. I flipped open the paper calendar by the stove, the one that still carried our dentist's logo after all these years, and squared my pencil on the month. Travel dates, church fittings, harbor tides, the tidy choreography of a life that knows how to keep its balance. My eye caught a note from last spring, a barbershop afternoon where I'd thumbed through a glossy magazine and seen a winery press photo. Smiles, glassware, a CEO named like a law firm. I hadn't known the face then. Now a filament connected that page to tonight's word and glowed. Fear did not arrive with teeth. It arrived like cold behind the knees. To be called a safety risk by your own blood is to feel the floor go through you. The humiliation tucked itself under the ribs and waited. But hope sat across from it with its elbows on the table, practical and older. If careful truth could repair what heat would only split, there was still work a man could do. I would not beg for a chair at my son's wedding. I would build a chair the truth could sit in, and I would carry it to the door without knocking. I stood, rinsed my hands until the water ran warm, and clicked off the oversink light. The house held its breath with me. The clock ticked. The horn on the bay spoke once more and fell quiet. I left the phone where it lay, screen up, mute as a promise. Outside, somewhere below the black water, the tide turned, and the harbor, being the harbor, obeyed. Dawn came iron cold and salt bright, the kind of Maine morning that makes metal sing when you touch it. Coffee hissed in the old kettle while gulls strafed the bait trucks below and diesel coughed the harbor awake. Linseed still rode the air from last night's oiling. A loose board near the stove clicked when I crossed it, a tiny admission that even houses carry nerves. I slept little and poorly, but ritual steadied what rest could not. I rinsed my cup, opened the shade to a strip of slate water, and told myself to move with the day instead of against it. The email arrived while the cup still steamed. The subject line wore a necktie. Update regarding guest list and event boundaries. The body was polite, past feeling. I was informed that, due to private considerations, the list had been adjusted and that the couple was protecting their peace. A blue link offered a family boundaries FAQ dressed like wellness and written like a press release. Politeness, I've learned, is not the same as kindness. Kindness has hands. This had gloves. The phone pinged again, neighbors, cheerful and earnest, building a bridge to the event I apparently no longer crossed. Which Navy suit, Lloyd? You flying or driving? I typed, erased, and typed again until the simplest evasion survived. Under the weather, the lie sat in my mouth like a bent nail. Tomorrow the diner would soften questions with pie, and I would measure each answer like a cut I could not glue back. Against better judgment, I opened Instagram. Marissa's ring filled the frame, bright as a signal flare. The caption read like a creed about cutting toxic energy and protecting our peace, and the comments from her professional circle stacked up like applause. The photo's angle was curated. The narrative came pre-assembled. Heat rose, quick and red, then passed as I set the phone face down and breathed until the feeling thinned into something usable. The shop offered its old discipline. I chose a straight-grained oak board and set the plane so the blade whispered rather than scraped. Shavings curled in pale ribbons and gathered at my boots like patient answers. I oriented the board to the grain not because it is faster, but because it is true. The loose latch on the shop window tapped once in the wind, a small report a carpenter hears, the way a sailor hears a new rattle aloft. Out of square, I noted, and pressed the plane forward. Rules keep a man from breaking himself. I repeated mine until they sat squarely. No angry calls, no public airing, no triangulation. Speak only when what I carry cannot be twisted. Diane's maxim followed, bright as chalk. Verify with kindness. Don't confuse pride with truth. Decision hardened in the quiet. I would not react. I would document. Not suspicion, but corroboration. I cleared a space on the bench and opened the old laptop that still smells faintly of the library where I bought it used. A yellow pad waited beside it. At the top, I printed a guardrail in pencil. Public info only, no contact, no surveillance. I listed legitimate sources I could check without trespass. Winery website, press releases, event calendars, trade magazines, public social posts. If facts existed, they would wear names and dates. Grain shows itself when you pass the blade lightly enough. The winery site offered a calendar crisp with fonts and photographs. Press tastings, regional activations, charity pours. A PR blog showed photos with captions that named executives, venues, and days that could be checked against other days. One entry stopped me. A private tasting week, Boston, snug in the square that held the dates Evan once told me Marissa would be at a desert wellness retreat. I did not leap. I screen capped, copied the page URL, and wrote time and location in a hand that slowed as the pattern began to surface. I clicked to a beverage industry newsletter I knew from dentist waiting rooms. There it was again, Boston, similar dates, branded hashtags. A boutique hotel's public events page listed a seller talk matching the color of the flyer on the PR blog. No conclusions, only alignment. I underlined the calendar squares and circled Boston twice. The kettle cooled. The shop breathed. I exhaled until my chest felt returned to me. Printing is a comfort because paper holds steady while the mind rearranges. I printed the pages, 3-hole punched them, and slid them into a plain binder. On the cover, I wrote in pencil, small and private, E, pre-wedding notes. Inside, I added a front sheet titled What I Know / What I Think and split it down the middle with a ruler. Facts on the left, public dates, captions, times, places, hypotheses on the right, restrained, provisional, erased where they wandered. Columns keep you honest, pencils forgive. Shame tugged one way, loyalty the other, each with an old claim on my ribs. The word unsafe, lodged like a wedge, made me smaller than the man who raised a boy with these hands. But clarity stepped between them, held out both palms, and asked for quiet. If truth belonged to me, it would not need my volume, it would need my patience and my posture. Chair first, then delivery. I checked the inbox once more. Nothing from Evan, nothing I wanted from anyone else. The shop window brightened half a shade. I set the plane for a finishing pass, and the blade skimmed a knot and chattered, a small jolt announcing depth I had not accounted for. I set the tool down, circled Boston on the printout one more time, and wrote beneath it, "Independent confirmation. Coat as binder, not to chase." To ask a friend for public verifiable details, the way a mariner checks his position by lights everyone can see. If there was a seam opening in this house, I would shim it with facts and the quiet weight of careful work. Outside, the harbor exhaled. I locked the shop and walked toward the truck, the morning hard and honest and mine to carry. The morning wore a polished gray, the kind of coastal light that makes edges honest. I gassed up the truck, slid the plain binder onto the passenger seat, and poured black coffee into the dented thermos Diane once teased me for keeping. My mind felt steadier than the night before. Before starting the engine, I opened the yellow pad, read the guardrail aloud, and underlined each word as if they were studs behind a thin wall, public info only. No contact, no surveillance. Saying it made a brace in my chest I could lean on. Halfway to the highway, I pulled over by a turnout where spruce trees shoulder the road and the bay shows between them like torn cloth. I called Hank. He and I had pulled wet people from worse water. Words were never our currency. We traded names and weather, then I asked a favor so narrow it could walk a chalk line. "Check what's posted where anyone can see it," I said. "Lobby boards, easels, calendars, no back of house, no following, no staff whispers." He answered the way men do when they already decided. "Copy that." Silence hummed. "If it's public, it's public." By noon, he was on his shift in Boston, and the first text picture landed. A lobby easel with a brushed brass placard, "Private Tasting Week, dates in serif font, arrows to ballrooms A and C. Nothing hidden, nothing coy." Another text came. A photo from the hallway showing a cork display and a stack of programs anyone could pick up. He called on his brake, voice steady over a bustle of luggage wheels. He had seen, on earlier evenings, a woman who matched Marissa's look arrive more than once with a well-dressed middle-aged man the staff called Mr. Keene. He was careful to add that the introductions had been made on a microphone, name and title spoken in a room where guests snapped photos openly. Lobby knowledge, hallway air. I drove home with the binder buckled in like a passenger who might testify. At the kitchen table, I searched Keene and Oak Vineyards, and the screen answered with the firm inevitability of Tide. Press pages, industry profiles, photos with captions. Adrian Keene, CEO, beneath a handshake shot in Boston, the timestamp sitting squarely on the week Evan once called a desert wellness retreat. I printed the bylined pieces, wrote the URLs and dates in the margins, and slid them into sheet protectors. Details matter most when your voice is smallest. The urge to call my son rose like a hand you can't keep down in church. I sat on it. I wrote instead. A letter slows the blood and confines the mouth to truth it can spell. "Evan," I began, and then deleted the second line 3 times until only intention remained. I asked for a private man-to-man talk before the vows, promised to bring only public information, promised no ambush, no crowd, no performance. I wrote a closing line that steadied me as much as it would steady him. If I'm wrong, I'll say it to your face. If I'm right, I want you to know before you promise with your whole life. I walked the letter to the post office because driving would have been a run from myself. The clerk, who calls everyone hun and never asks questions that pinch, stamped it with a firm ka-thunk that sounded like a pledge kept. Outside, the air tasted of pennies and brine. Waiting began, a weather you have to stand in without checking the clock. Back in the shop, I sanded an end cap and finally fixed the loose latch that had been narrating my nerves. When it held fast without ticking, the room exhaled an inch. Hank called again around 4. He read off times from the lobby board like coordinates. Thursday through Saturday, ballrooms A and C, afternoon sessions, and evening keynote. Mr. Keene introduced by name at least once. He could have kept going. He didn't need to. I wrote each detail into the binder's facts column, then capped my pen and left the hypotheses column blank for a full minute, practicing restraint like a craft. None of this was secret. It sat in hallways where anyone with eyes could see. I paused and interrogated the quiet. Was I trying to win or to warn? The question put me under oath with myself. I reread the guardrail on the pad and the carbon copy of my letter. I decided on a small escalation, not in heat but in clarity. I built a slim evidence sleeve, 3 printed press items, calendar screenshots, a single-page timeline with sources. Nothing extra, nothing I would be ashamed to show a stranger. The discipline eased the hum behind my ribs. 3 days later, the mail carrier brought a certified envelope that felt colder than the air. A law firm letter representing Marissa. The language did not shout, it shaved. Emotional interference, boundary violations. A warning that they might seek a temporary restraining order if I continue contact or attempt to insert myself into the ceremony. My knees didn't buckle so much as loosen, like floorboards that have taken on water. I wasn't afraid of court. I was heartsick at the recognition that a script was being typeset to recast me as a danger in my own family story. I did not call, post, or argue. I photographed the envelope, filed the letter into a new Receive section of the binder, and wrote a calm summary log in the same hand I use when measuring a board I can't afford to waste. Then I made tea and stood by the window long enough to let the first heat go where heat goes when a man refuses to throw it. Help me be exact, not loud, I said, the kind of prayer that uses no name and all of them. Evening pressed its shoulder to the glass. I placed the binder on the dining table beside Diane's photo and ran my thumb along the scar Evan left in 7th grade. The latch in the shop held. I pulled a fresh page and drafted a checklist titled Clean Delivery, Pastor Counsel, Evidence Order, Witness to Handoff. No scenes, no microphones, no surprises. If truth has weight, it will carry itself. My job is to build a steady handle. When the ink dried, I capped the pen, switched off the kitchen light, and let the house settle around the quiet work I had chosen up. Late light turned the harbor pewter and combed the spruces in one direction, the way a hand finds order in a child's hair. The latch I'd fixed in the shop held its tongue. I took that quiet as permission. The binder rode shotgun and the clean delivery checklist folded once in my inside pocket. I kept repeating the only prayer I trusted, exact, not loud. When a man has more feeling than remedy, precision is a mercy. The White Hill Church wore the afternoon like an old shawl. Inside, sun came through wavy glass and scattered into slow dust, and the pews I'd planed twice in my life creaked as if to nod. Pastor Matthew met me halfway down the aisle, a broad man softened by years of funerals and casseroles. We sat without hurry. I set the binder on the bench between us and opened it to the table of contents like a craftsman showing his joints. What is my duty, I asked, when I hold truth that could void a vow? He took his time with the pages, reading the way people read when they know paper can be cross-examined. Speak to the one whose consent is at stake, he said at last. Do it in a form least corruptible, paper, sequence, citations, and don't ambush. The word made a clean edge in the air. We rehearsed the order, cover letter first, brief and human, then the timeline, then 3 bylined articles with dates and names where anyone with eyes could see them. Hank's lobby photographs next, labeled with nothing more than the easel captions they already bore. Finally, screenshots of calendars with URLs typed below, each link a little plank in a bridge a reasonable man could cross. I had already learned that people don't accept truth because you feel it. They accept it because you carried it the way a level carries a bubble, steady and legible. I slid a plain white envelope from the binder and wrote by hand, "For Evan, read before you say, I do." No adjectives, no verdicts, only the small gravity of timing. Matthew offered to keep a sealed duplicate in his office safe. "Witness, not advocate," he said, and I nodded. "Fair," I answered. We shook once in the aisle. The church air smelled of hymnals and wax and the clean dryness of old pine. A messenger would be needed. Family would bring sparks. Neighbors would bring talk. I thought of Jason, the boy who had eaten pancakes at my table and grown into a nurse with the steady hands people remember when the light is bad. He loved Evan for Evan, not for spectacle. I texted him with a time and a place, nothing else. The less we spoke on a phone, the fewer angles there were to misread. We met in a hospital cafeteria after visiting hours, a room that smelled of coffee that had given up. He came in with his badge still clipped, eyes tired from fluorescent honesty. I laid the envelope on the table and beside it the evidence sleeve he could examine. He read in silence, tracing the margins with his thumb, the way a person maps a coastline before a voyage. "I can do this," he said, "right before, speak now." I asked for no heroics, only delivery. "No speech," I said, "just a handoff." He nodded. "Just a handoff." Back at the motel, I let the room's slow Wi-Fi find its way to a local tag I'd been checking out of habit. A short video surfaced. A rooftop cocktail party, Boston skyline washed in late gold. In a window reflection behind the main subject, a familiar profile crossed. The CEO whose name my printouts knew by heart. The timestamp sang in harmony with the week Evan had called Desert Wellness. I didn't download it. I copied the public URL into the timeline and wrote beside it, "Soft corroborant, reflection evidence. Use with care. Not every board needs a screw, some hold with fit alone." Jason texted later than I expected. He had received messages from Marissa earlier in the week. Screenshots showed her lines in the easy tone of people who expect agreement. "Help keep the day peaceful. I'm worried Lloyd is escalating. There's a private after-ceremony event for those who truly support us." A small ache went through me, recognition of a net, not a thread. Influence gathers its own weather. Don't reply, I wrote. No confrontation. And don't mention the envelope. He sent back a single dot, which is how he says yes when he's already moving. I recentered the code. On the front page of the binder, I added an ethics note in small print. All items herein are public sources. No private surveillance was used. Sometimes you have to say out loud what you refuse to do, if only to hear yourself promise it again. Then I set to logistics like a quartermaster. Vantage point. Staff parking outside the venue, close enough to watch, far enough to be no one's story. Jason's arrival time, tie color, hand to lapel signal. Backup plans. If he was blocked, Pastor Matthew would deliver. If both were blocked, I'd overnight the packet with sworn statements and let the truth arrive the way certified mail does. Unapologetic and dated. I laid out the Navy suit on the bed, not to attend, but to testify, to myself as much as anyone, that I would not arrive as a saboteur. Shoes shined, shirt pressed, the small honesty of clean seams. Shame loosened an inch. Purpose tightened too. In the mirror, Diane's absence found me in the angle of my shoulders and left again before it could bruise. "If I'm wrong, let me be wrong gently," I said. "If I'm right, let the timing be merciful." Prayer doesn't need grammar when it's that close to the bone. Night rolled down over the harbor and left the church on its hill like a lantern someone forgot to blow out. I slid the envelope into my inside pocket and felt the paper warm against my ribs. Pastor Matthew's duplicate went to his safe with a soft metal click. We shook in the doorway, two men choosing method over noise. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," I answered. Headlights caught the pews through the church windows as I pulled away. Benches I had planed smooth enough for vows, no matter which ones would be spoken. The latch at home stayed quiet. The harbor exhaled. I set the binder on the dining table beside Diane's photo and turned off the lamp. The house settled around a plan built square, a handle ready for the weight it would have to carry. The sky over the riverside estate looked scrubbed clean, a hard blue that offered no shade of doubt. Strings warmed up under a sailcloth tent, their scales bright as glass. I parked among vans with magnetic logos and folding ladders, where staff came and went with the brisk, quiet purpose of people who make beauty look accidental. The maple behind the service lane gave me a sliver of shadow. I stood there and let my breath find an even stroke. The envelope rode inside my jacket like a small heartbeat. The backup rested miles away in Pastor Matthew's safe, cool as a stone at the bottom of a well. The place smelled of everything fresh cut. Grass clipped to regulation, roses groomed to polite perfection, eucalyptus threaded through bouquets like clean punctuation. Rosin dust lifted from violin bows and settled again. Camera shutters nipped at the air, distant insects more curious than hungry. Ushers practiced their choreography, palming programs, guiding guests to the correct side with soft elbows. Words rose and drifted past. Boundaries, peace, perfect day. The lectern at the front held a gooseneck mic and a script folder. The officiant tested pages with a thumb and made a small square out of his shoulders that said he knew his cues. I noted the exits, a habit from boats and storms. I noted the best man 3 places to Evan's left, shoulders squared like a man who works the night shift and knows how to stand still. Jason appeared on time, hair settled, tie simple. He gave the signal we'd chosen for its nothingness, a brief hand to the lapel as if smoothing a wrinkle. I answered with a single period on my phone and then put the device away for the rest of the day. We did not wave. We did not look again. Discipline against spectacle is a craft like any other. You practice until your body remembers. Evan stood at the end of the aisle in a black tux that made him look older until you noticed the boy alive in the set of his mouth. Too handsome, a little pale. His left thumb worried the cufflink I'd given him when he graduated. A nervous grace I knew without having to name. Hope rose like a misfired nail. I tapped it back in with the only sentence I trusted. I am here to deliver, not decide. The envelope warmed under my palm. The music pivoted and people turned as if a tide had shifted. Marissa came down the aisle radiant, her bouquet carried high enough to hide the phone nested in the blooms. The smile was immaculate. The eyes, though, always the eyes, ranged the tent in small, fast arcs. Lectern, planner, mother, aisle, back again. Her jaw set a half-beat late, the way wood sometimes sings after the blade passes. Right hand tight on the stems, a glance toward the lectern as if confirming the script she had already memorized. Guests sighed in the common language of ceremony. Phones lifted. The world believed the frame it had helped build. The officiant began his work, warming the room with words like trust, loyalty, truth. Language lands differently when the ear is tuned by evidence. I counted beats the way a carpenter counts threads before a screw binds. 2 paragraphs, a blessing, a turn to the couple, the small smile meant to be seen in photographs. Jason's posture tightened into readiness, not tense but available. At the back, Pastor Matthew had taken an unadorned seat and folded his hands, not advocate, witness. The tense light made everything look like it was under clean water. If anyone knows a reason, The line entered the air the way a keel enters a wave, a known motion with unknown result. The strings dipped lower, a courteous hush. Jason stepped half a pace forward, not enough to qualify as interruption, and set the plain white envelope in Evan's hand. No words, no grandness, a transaction you could miss if you were dazzled by the flowers. The efficient paused with professional grace, a gull cawed outside and lost interest. The air cooled by a degree that only the body tracks. Evan opened the flap. My handwriting on the cover letter met him first. I saw breath flare his collar. He read the first page, then the timeline, then the clippings, then the lobby photos with their own captions already printed by someone else's department, then the calendar screenshots with URLs underlined by my stubborn pencil. His eyes tracked like a craftsman, left to right, down and back, no skipping, no flinch. Confusion crossed his face and left. Concentration replaced it. A flash of hurt lit and dimmed, then a careful blankness, sheetrock smoothed over studs. He inhaled as if the tent had just been short on oxygen. Marissa registered the envelope, a flicker of static under her polish. Smile falter. Resume. Her glance marked the exits, the planner's shoulder, her mother's tissue, the maid of honor's fingers. Half a shoe nearer. The bouquet tipped a degree. Her lips formed 3 words without sound. What is that? And she swallowed them whole. The phone in the bouquet made the smallest ghost of a buzz. She killed it with a confidence born of long practice. I kept my back to the maple and my hands on the top rail of the service fence. Counting breaths is better than counting enemies. Deliver, then disappear, I told whatever organ in me loves a verdict. Truth does not need a chaperone. Contingency lived in the pocket under my hand. If chaos spiked, I would be the first to leave. Pastor Matthew held the duplicate. The plan would not rely on a man's adrenaline. Evan's right hand lifted as if to tap his temple, then lowered. He looked at Marissa, then at Jason, then down again. He slid the pages back into the sleeve and did not crumple them, a choice I took for thought over heat. The efficient moved to restart the script, face lined to soothe, but Evan said, evenly enough to be heard by those who needed to hear and no one else, I need a moment. The phrase did its quiet work, no gasp, no cheer. A seam opened where a seam had been drawn. Near the lectern, a sound tech hustled with the focus of a man who has been told there is a problem he did not make. He gathered a cable, flicked a switch, winced in apology to the maid of honor. I could not hear words. I only saw the flurry and filed it under noise, another thing to ignore while the real decision took shape. Later, I would learn what the mic had captured. For now, the only sound that mattered was paper returning to a sleeve and the small exhale of a man who had seen enough to stew his next step. I stepped a half pace deeper into shadow, which is where a father belongs when his son decides what weight his name will carry. The tent light went glassy. The river slid past in its own time. Somewhere beyond the hedges, a golf cart changed gears. The envelope rested against Evan's ribs now as it had against mine only hours earlier, and the difference between a scene and a choice stood as plain as a door. I did nothing. I waited for the ignition only he could strike. Time bent under the tent, the way heat makes a road waver. The strings fell silent mid-bow, one last note hanging like a question no one wanted to answer. The air cooled a degree against my cheeks. I stayed at the service fence where the maple shadow kept my jacket honest and my hands in place. From this angle, the aisle cut a clean line, the lectern squared to the river's slow light, and Evan stood inside a new weather only he could feel. He pressed the envelope to his chest as if steadying a level, jaw unclenching, shoulders finding a truer width. That half step he'd taken back from the altar line did more than any sentence could have, a declaration measured in boards and inches. He said something low to the officiant. Only those nearest could hear, and the man gave a patient nod, script suspended in midair like a sheet he chose not to lift. Marissa's smile collapsed and reassembled so quickly someone blinked and missed it. The bouquet trembled. Her eyes tracked exits and allies. Mother, maid of honor, planner, the lectern, the planner again. She tried to cross the thin space between them with a controlled reach, the kind of motion that means to bridge a gap before anyone admits there is one. Evan did not step forward. In the front row, her mother rose, leaned toward the planner, and made a small, slicing gesture as if to say, "Continue." The gesture looked rehearsed, a muscle memory for tidying scenes. Guests split into visible schools. The front rows leaned in, the back rows craned. A few phones lifted, then wavered, as if their owners remembered too late what it means to film a wound. One groomsman shifted 2 inches sideways and blocked sight lines without being told. A bridesmaid dabbed an eye already dry. Social electricity ran its quick sequence, confusion, realization, hush, and the tent felt suddenly too bright, like a hospital ward when a monitor starts to speak for the body. At the sound table, a tech hustled with goggles of apology. He gathered a cable, flicked a switch, checked the snake of wires like a field medic. I marked the flurry in the corner of my eye and would have let it live as mere noise if not for what rose through the speakers next. Thin, present, undeniable. For a few seconds, an audio bleed slipped into the room, not loud but clean enough to reach the front rows. A recorded whisper from earlier, the kind of private tone people use when they believe the world is upholstered. Marissa's voice, steady and crisp. "If he shows up, I'll call the police and say he threatened me." The sentence didn't shout. It landed. The nearest guests turned to stone. A front row uncle pulled in his breath the way a man does when the ocean drops out from under his feet. The planner froze, mid-step, one hand raised to nowhere. Jason, trained by a life near alarms, palmed the mic head by instinct, and the tech dragged the fader down so hard the sliders clicked their rails. Silence came bigger than the leak, a bell jar over the room. In the back, Pastor Matthew closed his eyes once, not praying for victory, but witnessing a fact. Evan bent and gathered a loose page that had drifted toward the toe of his shoe. He smoothed it against the sleeve with care, the gesture of a man trying to set one flat plane inside a field of buckling. He looked at Marissa, and in his face I saw not anger, but the absence where belief had been. He spoke quietly to the officiant, a sentence with the bones of a decision. "I need to step away." The officiant could not resume. The ceremony could not pretend the path still ran straight. Damage control arrived on cue. Marissa's mother leaned in and formed the words, "It's doctored," with her mouth. Emphasis on the second syllable, bright with certainty and stage experience. The planner tried to wave the quartet to play, but the players hesitated, bows suspended as if music had been ruled inadmissible. A bridesmaid reached for Marissa's elbow. Marissa made a minimal shake of the head and kept the center she'd trained to keep. A few guests stood and then stopped, unsure which way dignity pointed. Photographers lowered their cameras. No one wanted to own this image. I did not enter the tent. I did not look for anyone's eyes. The plan had been to deliver and disappear, and plans earn their keep in the moment you most want to revise them. Truth, once audible, does its own walking. I marked the sound tech's face and the officiant's poise as future coordinates if Evan needed witnesses later. Then I stepped back a half shoe into deeper shade, as if the maple had offered me a place to store the heat my body didn't need. The officiant, voice calm as a doctor at the end of a bed, announced a brief pause. Ushers pivoted into their soft choreography, guiding guests out in small, parallel streams, the way water finds 2 channels when a rock splits a river. The quartet set bows down. The planner conferred with the venue manager, both expressions carefully neutral, like people studying a map of a town they have never visited. Evan handed the envelope to Jason long enough to straighten his jacket, and Jason returned it without comment, the way men who understand stakes pass a tool back to the hand that must use it. Then the threshold presented itself. Evan stepped off the altar line and toward the side path alone. No one blocked him. No one touched him. He carried the envelope at his center as if it contained ballast rather than paper. Marissa remained in place, veil slightly askew, bouquet lowered to a latitude that signaled both surrender and unwillingness. Her eyes glistened but did not break, a performer's discipline colliding with a new fact that did not accept cues. Behind the hedges, the river kept moving in the weather that belonged to it. A golf cart buzzed and fell silent someplace the tent could not see. I let that indifference steady me. Nature does not explain itself. It does not spin. It does not call the police on an ocean for rising when the moon is full. I backed away first. The next actions had to belong to Evan or they would not belong to him at all. From the edge of the parking lane, I saw the sound tech coil the mic cable with unusual care, then slide a small USB recorder into a zippered pouch. The gesture looked like tidiness until it didn't. A seed with a label tucked itself into the day. I crossed the gravel and stood by my truck with the door still shut. The maple shadow broke over my shoes. I let the scene close without me as witness and made a note where only I could hear it. The truth had stood up in its own clothes, and the room had felt the difference between a story and a record. Night would come, and with it rooms that held fewer people and more oxygen. A conversation would begin that looked like repair, not theater. The river moved on. So did I, one careful breath at a time, leaving space for my son to walk through the opening he had made. Late afternoon thinned to a blue-gray that made edges uncertain. Guests peeled away in murmuring clusters toward the gravel lot, their shoes whispering through petals that had been meant for a different ending. Golf carts clicked into reverse, caterers stacked trays with the reflex of people trained to erase an hour. I stayed in the staff lane until the tent emptied of its heat. The maple shadow wasn't necessary anymore. Delivery had been made. The sentence in my head changed key. Repair, not theater. I texted no one. I waited for the one voice I'd step toward. Jason found me first, coming along the side path with the even gait of a man who has practiced calm. He returned the envelope. The seal looked tired, not broken. Clean handoff, he said, and let the air absorb the rest. He mentioned the audio bleed, the few seconds that had scraped the room open, and nodded toward the sound desk. He had seen the tech coil a cable and slip a small USB recorder into a pouch. The gesture read as tidiness until it didn't. We didn't demand, we asked. Jason spoke to the tech the way he would speak to someone waking up in recovery. Soft, precise. He asked whether a segment had been captured by accident. The tech flushed and nodded. He offered, on his own, to provide a copy to protect himself and the venue. We made our boundary plain. We didn't want anything private, only the portion already heard. He plugged the recorder into a laptop, trimmed to the bleed, and saved those seconds onto a new stick he pulled from a blister pack. I photographed the handoff beside the tent clock for a simple chain of custody. Time, place, purpose, scope. Then I slid the USB into a labeled coin envelope and wrote, "Public leak only" in block letters that would read on a bad day. The stick shouldn't live with me. It needed a neutral adult willing to be boring in the best way. I called Pastor Matthew. He answered on the second ring, said one word, "Come," and kept the rest for when paper could join us. In the church office, he set out a manila envelope and a log sheet. I wrote the source, date, and the phrase limited to audible portion that reached the room. He initialed, I initialed. He placed the USB with the duplicate evidence packet, sealed the flap, and tucked the bundle into the old safe, whose dial clicks like a clock that no longer cares about minutes. "Witness," he said. I nodded. "Not advocate." Night were a sodium stain over a freeway motel. Curtains leaked orange and the heater breathed in small, stubborn puffs. I poured coffee into paper cups, the kind that collapse if you hold them too tightly. Evan arrived without knocking, jacket rumpled, collar open, eyes ringed like a swimmer's. He sat on the edge of the chair the way men sit when words cost. He turned the envelope with two fingers as if it were a tool he wasn't ready to use again. "You knew," he said, and the sentence wasn't an accusation. I answered what deserved the room, long enough to test it. He took a breath he must have been holding all afternoon. "Thank you for the method," he said, and looked at the carpet, relieved by the absence of a scene. I didn't let victory language anywhere near us. I told him I hadn't come to win, only to warn, that love without clarity is hazard, like electricity without a ground. He stared at the envelope and admitted, quiet as fog, that he would have married her. He didn't apologize, he didn't need to. He managed another breath and steadied. The relief in the room was not joy. It was oxygen returning after a tight hallway. We agreed on a posture and nothing performative. No public shaming, no posting, only direct communications to the people who needed them. Evan drafted a short email to Marissa and CC'd her counsel. Ceremony suspended, time needed, references limited to publicly verifiable material, requests for returning gifts and coordinating with vendors. He wrote in clean paragraphs and clicked send without watching it leave. Then he prepared a brief statement for both families asking for privacy and declining speculation. Jason volunteered to be the practical bridge, collect coats, cancel transport, steer relatives away from the temptation to narrate. An hour later, the world found its way to itself. A local community account uploaded an anonymized clip of the hot mic snippet, voice modulated, faces blurred, names absent. The caption reframed it not as gossip but as a question: how safety language can be weaponized when power wants a script. Comments tilted. Sympathy for Evan took the front row, curiosity bent toward the idea that boundaries can be a shield or a blade. We hadn't sent anything. We said so to each other again to make it true, twice. Pastor Matthew kept the original USB so a straight line could be drawn if anybody asked. I opened the binder on the motel desk and added a narrow page. Chain of custody photo, the time the tech handed the stick, one sentence reminding future me that we did not solicit or publish. I appended a timeline addendum: handoff, pause, dispersal, motel meeting, plan. Paper can hold shape when memory buckles. It is a decent mercy. We chose process over speed. Evan opted to postpone, not annihilate, any decision about the relationship until conversations could be held without microphones or choreography. He forwarded vendors a neutral notice, unforeseen circumstances, thank you for your work, and offered to absorb fees rather than bargain with embarrassment. Dignity over discount. I reminded him of a rule I trust in wood and in trouble: let facts, not anger, pay the bills. I promised him I would not speak to neighbors, press, or the internet. Any inquiry would be directed to his one-paragraph statement and stop there. "I'll be available," I said, "not visible." He nodded, and the look we traded crossed out the old parent-child reflex and signed something new between men. He tucked the envelope into his inside pocket, and it looked lighter, changed from weight to rail. We tossed our cups and listened to the room settle. Outside, freeway noise folded into a rain that started so softly it felt like an idea choosing a body. The air cleaned itself against the window screen. We stood when the rain found time and shook hands like a promise had been made without ceremony. "Tomorrow then," he said. I answered with the word that had been waiting all summer: home. Within a week, he would come back to Maine and sleep until noon and fix what creaked. I would hang the Navy suit on the closet door to breathe again and think about how promises don't always die. Sometimes they change address. For now, there was rain and a road and the sound of tires finding their lane. The binder closed. The safe clicked shut a town away. The night held. Repair had begun. A week later, the rain washed itself out of the night and left the morning salt bright and clean. The shingles dried in angled stripes, spruce needles shone like wet threads. I cracked the kitchen windows and the house exhaled the last of its old breath. Gulls worked the harbor without argument. The clock over the stove felt quieter, as if vigilance had stepped off post and left room for ordinary time to return. I moved through the rooms, checking nothing in particular, hands on door frames, a man registering his own address after a long absence from it. Evan pulled in just before 10, a rental sedan whispering on wet gravel. He carried one suitcase and a garment bag, the jacket still creased from flights and decisions. He came in without knocking, which is the only way that doorway has ever made sense. We held a small embrace that landed square, no back patting, no manly clatter, then parted with a nod that did the rest of the talking. He slept past noon the next day, and the house learned again the hum of a second toothbrush resting in the cup by the sink. Work began where work could be done. At the dining table, he composed a brief, dignified email to Marissa and CC'd her counsel. The engagement ended, references limited to publicly verifiable materials, gratitude for shared time, requests for coordinating returns and vendor closures. The sentences were plain and clean, sanded of heat. He archived the thread and disabled social tag notifications as if he were shutting windows before a storm that had already passed. Small mercies for a nervous system trying to be a home again. Messages went to vendors next. Postponed indefinitely, please finalize invoices. No bargaining with embarrassment. Dignity over discount. To both families, he sent one paragraph asking for privacy and declining speculation, a short fence polite enough to discourage climbing. Jason took the practical shift, picking up coats left at the venue, returning a borrowed shawl, steering well-meaning relatives away from their itch to narrate. Silence, when consistent, trains a community. By midweek, the diner had relearned the kindness of nod and pour. Home offered medicine my body trusted. We tightened the cupboard hinge with the tired spring. We planed the edge of the door that stuck on humid days. We replaced the frayed pull on the attic hatch. In the shop, the bench took us back the way a hymn takes a congregation where it needs to go. Plain, sand, oil, the rhythm that tunes two people to the same key without forcing a song on them. Evan relearned the weight of a number, 4 in his hand, the sound a keen iron makes when it meets true grain. We didn't say much, the work said more than we could have managed. The navy suit came out of the closet and hung on the door to breathe. I shook the sleeves and saw the shoulders were still true. It didn't feel like a grief marker anymore. It felt like a placeholder, a garment patient enough to wait for the right weather. I pressed the lapel flat with my palm and found no bitterness there, only relief at the illusion we had dodged. Promises don't always die. Sometimes they change address. We drove the new pew rail to Pastor Matthew in the back of the truck wrapped in an old blanket. He met us at the church office and helped carry it into the sanctuary, where sunlight laid small windows of warmth along the floor. On the underside, I had carved a line with a veiner so light you'd miss it if you weren't looking. Truth walks slowly but does not lose the address. He read it, touched the letters with the pad of his thumb, and nodded without sermon. In the office, he showed us the manila envelope. The USB and duplicate packet sealed, logged, untouched. Witness, not advocate. Gratitude was traded in plain sentences and 2 handshakes that had nothing to prove. Paper wanted its finish coat, too. We added a dated note to the church log, hold until requested by Evan or counsel, and I wrote a final line in the binder at home. Decision made, no public statements beyond the family note, all paths documented. The clean delivery checklist folded flat and slid to the back, a job card stamped complete. That evening we took tea at the dining table, the steam soft and clean in the smaller light. Evan ran a finger along the shallow scar he had made in 7th grade, the ledger line that outlived a dozen sandings. We brought Diane's photo to the table, not as an altar, but as family. He held the frame for a moment, set it down, and looked at the wood. "Thank you," he said, a simple sentence wearing adult weight. I answered with the only thing fit to meet it. I hear you. Nothing else was required. Shame had gone out with the night rain. What remained was humility, repaired and quiet and built on the ground we had tested. Affection returned on adult terms. Fewer reflexes, more regard. We spoke about small forward tilts without drafting a future into duty. A drive to the headland when the wind lays down, maybe a new fishing license. Calls on Sunday that don't need a script. It felt like clearing a yard after a storm. Limbs moved aside, path visible, none of it heroic, all of it necessary. When darkness took the harbor, anchor bells ticked faintly under the wind, like clocks that refused to rush. The suit hung in silhouette against the bedroom window, the line of the shoulder easy as a resting tide. I switched off the shop light and stood a moment to listen for the latch I had fixed months ago. It held silent proof that a seam can close if you set it square and let it cure. Tomorrow would carry a quieter lesson, not about victory, not about loss, but about the kind of truth a life can sit on without rocking. I turned off the kitchen lamp and let the house keep our place until morning. Morning comes rinsed and plain, the kind of post-storm light that makes every edge honest. The kettle hums a steady note while I unfold the tide chart out of habit, even though no trip is planned. The house has its quiet back. I set the chart aside and touched the workbench once, the way you pat a dog that kept watch. This last chapter is not victory and not defeat. It's orientation, how to face the water and keep your feet. Words failed us before they fooled us. Unsafe, boundaries, peace, good words turned sharp because intent bent them. I learned to ask for evidence with grain, the kind you can read under your thumb. Dates, names, places. Feelings told me where to look. Facts showed me when to act. I am from a generation that learned endurance before vocabulary, but a man can add precision without losing strength. Consent, I found, is simply clarity spoken out loud before anyone is asked to kneel. A father owes clarity without spectacle. A son owes decision without blame. That's the covenant I missed when I was busy surviving. The envelope taught me the difference between weight and rail. Burden on one day, guidance on the next. Evan's arc was not toward suspicion, but toward discernment. He did not learn to doubt. He learned to read. I stood behind the tree because that is where a father stands when a man chooses his own weather. Grief learned a new job here. Diane's memory moved from shrine to compass. Love, properly kept, doesn't paint over rot. It checks the level, calls for shims, opens a window. The navy suit breathes on its hanger without accusation. Blessing, it turns out, isn't a calendar date. It's readiness, a willingness to place your hand on a shoulder when the grain reads true and remove it when the wood says no. Method made mercy. The rules that steered me are simple enough to write on a shop wall. No heat over the phone. Public information only. No trespass. Exact, not loud. Deliver, then disappear. Each one preserved someone's dignity, including Marissa's. We did not torch reputations or throw meat to crowds. We kept consent at the center and let facts walk in their own shoes. The USB rests in a church safe, available but unhurled, because truth that can prove itself doesn't need a parade. Communities learn too. Small towns adjust to consistency. You refuse the gossip once, it doubles back. You refuse it 10 times. It seeks another kitchen. The vendors, ushers, and the man at the soundboard behaved like decent witnesses, not amplifiers. Their quiet kept the story the right size. Rumor has a half-life when it is not fed. A nod and pour at the diner says more than any speech you will ever make. If this is counsel, it is practical and brief. When family conflict invokes safety, start with 3 questions. What's verifiable? Cite it, date it, source it. What's reversible? Choose the action that doesn't salt the earth. Who's the right witness? Not an ally who will cheer, but a witness who will sign. Patience charges a fee, but spectacle charges interest. Pay the smaller bill, keep your receipts, sleep. I am still learning a kind of tenderness that doesn't announce itself. Softness isn't surrender. It is a hand steadying a chair so someone else can sit. It is a cup of tea made right when words are wrong. It is a latch you fixed 3 months ago that stays quiet during high wind. If older men want to trade for whatever power they're tired of carrying, try maintenance. Keep things square so others can rest. Domination exhausts a house. Care brings the air back. We keep small hopes where they can't trip us. A drive with Evan to the headland when the wind lays down. Sunday calls that happen without choreography. Teaching him to tune a plane iron until the shaving comes off is one clear ribbon. Blessing the next woman he loves if the grain reads true. No bitterness carried forward. The table will keep its single scratch because history is not a flaw. It is a proof. I walk to the shop because endings belong to rooms that made the beginning possible. Sunlight lays a clean stripe on the bench. The finished pew rail catches dust like slow snow. I check the irons, strop once, and hang the navy suit with care, not as relic, not as warning, but as hospitality for the future. If a day asks for blessing, I want to be ready without having to ask whether I kept myself ready. On the mantel, Diane's photo holds a corner of the morning without owning it. I say the only prayer I trust with both hands in my pockets. Keep me exact. I picture Pastor Matthew safe and the envelope inside it available, not weaponized. I picture Jason who knows how to stand still. I picture the sound tech who coiled his cable like a man declaring a standard. These are the people who make a life not louder but sturdier. Evan steps into the doorway and watches me check the edge on a chisel. Good, he asks, the word more about us than the tool. Good, I answer and leave it there. We don't need benedictions, we need habits. We need a bench that doesn't wobble when someone leans on it. This is all I can hand down without pretending to have more. I can't make life easy for my son, but I can keep the surface true and the tools sharp. When truth arrives, it won't need my voice, only a steady place to sit. In the quiet after a storm, what remains isn't spectacle, it's orientation. Truth, handled with care, becomes less a weapon than a level. It shows where the surface is honest and where it isn't, and invites us to plane away what doesn't fit. Boundaries heal when they protect consent, not when they script control. Patience costs less than drama, and dignity, kept for everyone, outlasts any headline. In families, love is not proven by how loudly we defend a story, but by how steadily we keep the bench square, own our part, and choose actions we can live with when the room is quiet again. Blessing isn't a date on a calendar, it's readiness, a practiced willingness to welcome what's true and release what was only noise. Thank you for spending this time with us. If something here resonated, share your thoughts below. What line stayed with you? What choice felt hardest? What truth you're learning to carry? Your comments help this community grow with grace. And if the journey spoke to you, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so the next story finds you right on time.